Welcome to the GEM series, powered by Rocket Level. On this podcast, we empower entrepreneurs to succeed by setting big goals, executing like a pro, and having a fearless mindset. The GEM series is all about investing in yourself. We're here to share the path to getting what you want out of life by sharing the stories of entrepreneurs who have done this themselves, providing thorough research from our team on what careers and habits are yielding the best results, and discussing the mindset it takes to overcome the obstacles that all future entrepreneurs will face. Investing in yourself starts with putting in the work every single day, and this podcast is here to help you do exactly that. My name is Blake Chapman. I'm the Vice President of the Ambassador Program here at Rocket Level, and I am thrilled to be your host for the GEM series. Hello and welcome to today's GEM series. I am absolutely thrilled to welcome today's guest, Amanda Neely. Amanda is an entrepreneur running both Profit First and Bank on Yourself Professional, and the co-host of Grandma's Wealth Wisdom Financial Podcast with her husband, Brandon Neely. It's really, really great, by the way. Everybody should check it out. They also founded and managed Overflow Coffee Bar, L3C, from 2008 through 2018. Now they share experiential knowledge through podcasting and through developing personalized financial strategies for individuals and couples and profitability strategies for businesses. And who doesn't need that right now? Amanda, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Hey, I'm thrilled to have you on. So Amanda, for those who don't know you, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself with our audience here?
For sure. The thing you need to know about me is that I'm an activist at heart. From an early age, I forced my parents to start recycling. I watched Save the Whale documentaries. When I left college, I went into the nonprofit sector. My whole life has been about how do I make this world better? How do we, change the world? And I learned very quickly after a couple years in the nonprofit sector that there's some really cool stuff happening in business that's making the world a better place all the time. And so dove in head first and never looked back. Still love the nonprofit world, just found my home and what's right for me in business.
Absolutely. And that is so cool and something that I feel like, people talk about a lot, but it's not something that I actually get to see people come into business from that perspective very often. So that's really exciting. So I'd love to hear a little bit more of the beginning. I love always hearing like the childhood stories and things like that. So yeah, when did you first start finding like that you cared about these things?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I'm a millennial, so I think it was kind of always there, right? On,
totally.
The TV or in the classroom, right? I think in elementary school, we like bought an acre in the rainforest, stuff like that. It's just kind of always been there. But when I thought about different professions, what do I want to be when I grew up, they always had that. How do I make the future better? Even when I was thinking about archaeology, right? I got my mom to get me a subscription to Archaeology magazine. Yes, I'm a nerd. And
I love Archaeology magazine too. It's great.
And it was I wanted to learn about the past so that I could make the future better, right? So we don't repeat those same mistakes. And thought about journalism for a while, but it was all about how do we tell stories to impact how people live the day to day and make sure that the most vulnerable are getting their stories told and, things are changing for their betterment, all those kind of things. Maybe it's because my parents are in public assistance when I was born. My mom went back to college in her 30s to provide for our family. And I just didn't want any family to be experiencing poverty like I had as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's so powerful, and I'm sure shaped your your worldview. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So going into, I guess, fast forwarding a little bit, what was your first goal because you're an entrepreneur and I'm like, oh my gosh, Amanda, you're doing so many different things. Do you remember whenever you first set your sights on something that you wanted to go out and do and what that might've been?
Oh, so many things. Probably the main one was college, right? I grew up in a family where I would be the first direct descendant to go to college. And my mom, had gone and gotten associates in her 30s, but no one had ever gotten a bachelor's. And I, if you've looked at my dad's, lineage. And so that was a really big goal for me. And I thought long and hard about it. I read How to Pay for College, a book about it when I was in junior high school. I've always been that kind of person that has a goal and figures out how to get there and doesn't think that there's any kind of limits or limitations to what I can do. And so just kind of, learned as much as I could and believed I could do it and made it happen. Ended up going to a university that cost more than what my parents made in terms of tuition.
Wow.
So.
Wow. And then you went and started your own business.
Yeah.
Like another big goal. Yeah. What kind of brought you to that point? What was that season of life like for you whenever you were like, oh my gosh, I think we're gonna go for it and do this?
So my husband, Brandon, came up with the idea first. And I was like, nope, not doing it. Don't even think about it. But over time, started realizing the potential there. And I'll never forget the day that I was like, okay, we're doing this entrepreneurial thing. I was a grant writer at this nonprofit, and I was taking the funders to go see within an under-resourced neighborhood in Chicago what their money was doing in that neighborhood. And I arrive in my little, suit, and, I'm there with the big wigs, and we're looking around, and I'm like, I'm on the wrong side. I need to be in this community, boots on the ground, creating social change with these people, not arranging for somebody with resources to give them money and tell them what to do. And that's when I realized, like, I'm in the wrong role. And when I looked in that community, I saw the folks doing the most social change there were the mom and pop small business owners. And then I started thinking, what kind of business would we start? And we love coffee. We had, spent a lot of time in coffee shops. We thought, well, every community needs a third place, a place to rally around. And that's often the coffee shops. Historically, it's been there. So we started writing a business plan of how do we create this business that's doing good in the community, but also thinking about the sourcing and where things are coming from so that it's making a global impact at the same time. Never looked back.
So cool. And I love what you touched on, because I always am thinking, like, how do we make the world a little bit better? And I feel like it always starts with our immediate network and then going outward, and impacting the people closest to us. It seems like at least the way that I can envision making a positive change. And it sounds like you did exactly that or that was sort of where your head was at whenever you were starting the coffee shop.
Yeah. And over time, we found a great way to think about that. That's a really great visual. And it actually partly was inspired by Martin Luther King Jr. He said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're like, what if we do the inverse of that? What if we say justice or positive things happening anywhere could result in positive things happening everywhere? And that starts with the image there is a fountain. At the top of the fountains, and the more positive things you experience can overflow into positive things for your friends, your family, your immediate surroundings. The positive things you have can overflow to your neighborhood, and then from there to your city, your state, your country, and eventually to the whole world. But guess what? Things happening positively around the world feed back up to you and make your life better. And to realize we're all part of this interconnected system. But it starts at with us at the top of each of our fountains, and we all interconnect. It's a fun way to think about it that I think shows us the impact of the decisions we make daily.
Absolutely. Our output, it really, really does matter. And it's something that I love that. I love that idea. I have that, I'm like etching it into my brain so I can remember it right now. That's really good. So tell me, how are you all feeling? Like, what was the preparation for getting ready to pull off something like that? Because I know a lot of our audience is in a similar boat where they're like, oh my gosh, like, I want to make an impact somewhere and I want to get started in some way. Like, I don't know how to save money, or I don't know how to do this or that, whatever it takes to, like, what was it like for you all?
Yeah. So I'd have to take you back. I was 25 then, I think, somewhere around in there. And
wow, such a young start.
Yeah. Still had student debt, didn't have any assets to my name, nothing. Yeah. Didn't even own a car, right? We lived in the city, so we took public transit everywhere. And that was a big barrier at first. We thought, we're never going to be able to do this. How are we going to get first the knowledge that we need, but then especially the money. And there was that, 25-year-old idealism in me as well. That's like, well, we'll figure it out. If we're meant to do this, we'll figure it out. And so we just started sharing the story, sharing the dream with people. We started bootstrapping. I connected with a coffee roaster. I'd take an empty suitcase on the L and pick up a bunch of bags of coffee and take them to friends and family that wanted to buy coffee and support us and help us get going. We started, just figuring it out, sharing as much as possible. And there would be these connections, these little things that would happen that would open up doors that we didn't even know existed. One of those examples, a mentor of mine told me she had met someone who wanted to start a coffee shop in the same neighborhood that we wanted to be in. And at first I was like, well, I don't want to meet them. They could be our competitor. But then I thought, no, that's very limiting. There could be there's a neighborhood big enough for all of us.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, would you introduce me? Would love to hear what he's thinking about, if he's, what locations, just networking. And he ended up not really wanting to start a coffee shop, but wanting to see one started. And he introduced me to someone who knew a location. And that location was more of this partnership atmosphere where we didn't have to do everything ourselves. We could partner with other people, not, like they were going to be redoing the floors and the ceilings. We could just pay for some upgrades to make it more our brand and more suitable for a coffee shop. And that saved us a ton of money by partnering that way. And it was like that kind of doors opening and connections happening because we didn't know any better. And we kept just sharing the story and seeing what would happen as more and more people learned about the vision and decided how they wanted to come alongside, whether it was buying a bag of coffee or partnering with us to help us redo a building so that we could open there at lower cost.
Yeah. I think it's so amazing how powerful it is whenever you are driven by an outcome a little bit different than just making some money, because I think that bleeds through into every conversation and people can get a real sense of, how open-minded you are and what your, what your objective is with what you're trying to do, and all kinds of really neat things happen. So that's an amazing example of that happening.
Yeah.
How would you say that your philosophy around taking risks has changed from then versus now? I'd be curious about that too.
Yeah. So this is where we have to fast forward 2 years into after we'd opened the coffee shop. We had put countless hours, working for just the tips in the tip jar. We made it happen. And that's when we realized just how on the edge financially we really were, just how much risk we had really taken. And we thankfully met a financial planner. His name is Mark, who helped walk us back from that edge, build some nice foundations into our lives and into our business to make sure that we could make the world a better place, achieve this vision of global and local impact, but not file bankruptcy in the process. Or, kind of the mantra at that point became, we won't solve poverty nearly as well from the edge of poverty ourselves.
Absolutely.
And so we started taking those small steps and building true foundational wealth that we might not ever be rich, but we for sure would never be poor. And having that kind of mentality has driven us really far. It actually helped us sell that business when we were starting our family, which we never thought we would do when we were first starting, but it made sense when we got to that point, which we can get into that if you want. And it's driven us into the new business that we're in now, where that's exactly what we're doing for other business owners and entrepreneurs, is creating that foundation that they know they can launch into riskier things from without it being as risky as if they didn't have that foundation.
Yeah, no, that's so essential. So what were the steps where you're like, oh my gosh, we gotta, like, what was the realization moment? And then I guess I'd love to hear about that come to Jesus moment, so to speak,
Absolutely. So It was actually, we were hosting these documentary screenings. Not everybody cares as much about coffee. Maybe they care about human trafficking or, something else. And so we were doing some documentary screenings to just support other type of work. And we met this guy, Mark, who he was like, I'd love to show a documentary about money because money drives so much of what happens in the world for so many people. And we're like, yeah, sure, why not? We didn't really know what he did or, anything like that. We're just like, yeah, sounds good. We need a documentary to fill July of 2013 was the month. And, so we introduced the documentary. It goes, I've never seen it before. So I'm in the audience watching it along with everybody else. And then Mark's going to lead a discussion afterward. And when the credits were rolling on that documentary, I was furious that I had never been told these things before. I thought I knew about money. I'd started a business. I had managed our personal budget. We had, we were slowly paying off our debt, like all the things. I had my Big Susie Orman book that I referred to anytime I needed to make a financial decision. And I was super furious. And so I forced him to sit down with us and break down the concepts from this documentary and how we could implement them and better improve our lives. And the first step was honestly making our savings work smarter. We'd always kept a little bit of an emergency fund, but this was 2013. Interest rates were crazy low, like actually a little bit lower than they are now as the Fed's starting to raise interest rates. But also anytime we used it, we tapped into the emergency fund, we lost even that little bit of growth. And, all those kind of things. So that's the first thing we did was make our savings work smarter. And we stopped paying extra in our student debt. We instead put it into savings and into this savings vehicle. And within 2.5 years, we were able to pay off our student debt. This balance that slowly had ticked down for, the 10 years was now gone. Right. And it was amazing. And that was like, okay, we got this now. We made that huge step. 2.5 years to pay off debt. Now let's go after some bigger dreams. Let's, think about franchising. Let's think about starting a different business, expanding our revenue sources. All those kind of things became possible now that we had this foundation and we'd seen success with that foundation.
Oh my goodness. That's pretty amazing. And I think that's just such a crucial thing that I'm like, why is this not something that people are just like, I know everybody says this, but like we should be taught this in schools and, everything, right? Like the fact that you could, pay off incredible amounts of debt or, even go into school with a game plan right out the gate of understanding how you're going to get out of that debt if people knew the same knowledge that you did. Because some people might be paying that off for 20 years or 30 years or the rest of their life,
Yeah. Although I do have this hesitation. If this were taught in schools, I know we'd be taught by whoever, like we'd be taught the principles that whoever has the most money to decide those principles would decide that's what we're going to be taught. And so I'd much rather have it passed down from parents to their kids, the principles that have worked for them. But the thing is that a lot of parents don't even know yet. They're in their 40s and 50s and they haven't ever sought out financial literacy and beyond.
So all of this is pretty like tied into what you do now, right? Like this is exactly what you're sharing with everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. We sold that business. And when we thought, what's next? We can't go back and work in a cubicle. Actually, we're unemployable now. No one's going to hire us. What do we do? And we thought about how that story with money had changed and how much we had learned. And we're like, we got to start sharing this with other folks. So we actually took Mark on as a mentor and he taught us how to do what he does for other people. And we became Bank on Yourself professionals. A little while later, we became Profit First professionals because we were working with so many business owners and the cash flow of their business was so important. And that's what Profit First is really about, is making your cash flow work for you and for the business at the same time. And it's been such a joy to see businesses not only survive the pandemic, but get even better, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, actually that March of 2020, we had just moved from Chicago to Cincinnati. We actually, our moving van arrived on Friday, March 13th, when everything was shutting down. And I spent the next week calling clients, making videos for clients, talking about, okay, this is exactly why we built a foundation. Here's what you can use it for if you need, when your hours are being cut or your revenue is being lost. And it was a beautiful thing. And I know I'm going to look back 20, 30 years from now and know, like, that's when I knew that this wasn't just real for me. It was real for, so many of the people that I work with. And it was the case in point, the proving of the why I do all of this. And I'm super excited. I hope there's never a pandemic. I hope we never go through that kind of trial again. Sure. But knowing that I'm helping people make sure they can withstand whatever personally might happen, because we all know we're going to have, life happens. We all know personally we're going to enter times like that. And to have that kind of foundation that we can know is there for us, it's some of the most rewarding work. And it helps people be more generous, helps them give more to their nonprofits, tithe, the full 10%, whatever they want to be doing. And so I know and like live into their passion, fulfill their purpose. It's all that world changing work comes right back to it too.
Wow. That's so neat. Imagine looking 20, 30 years from now and also being like, oh my gosh, that business is doing really well,
Yep.
and knowing you had a hand in that would be extremely fulfilling, I would imagine. So, I would imagine that you probably built up a little, you started networking from your previous business, but what was the transition into doing what you do now, like in terms of just getting out there and meeting people and getting that ball rolling?
Yeah, there was a lot of, relational equity that we had from the previous business that really gave us a big boost. We didn't sell it for that much. We actually sold it to a nonprofit. We basically got back some of what we spent to get the business started. We didn't have a lot of funding to get going. So, but we had a ton of relational equity. And that's really what we had focused on, because this was a community coffee shop. We built community. Sure. There'd be people that would come to buy coffee really because they wanted a conversation, not a cup of coffee. And so we leveraged that, and that really helped us. But then also about 4 months in, we had a little one, and we took a little maternity leave, and we had to start back up from there. Kind of lost some of the early momentum, but it was also like super rewarding to be able to build a business and build a little one at the same time.
Absolutely.
At work, at home, a totally different way to live life and be an entrepreneur than what it was like starting the coffee shop, right? As a family, I would be working and breastfeeding at the same time, stuff like that.
Yeah. You're like, I'm literally, no, that would be really, that would be really cool though, getting to see like, oh, this is like a new chapter of life and figuring out how everything works. And, I don't know, just be such a good new challenge for your brain, and, really exciting to add that to your story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something I was also kind of wondering about. So obviously it's, doing this is not easy. So I just want to know, like, just generally your mindset about like, how do you guys stay so motivated? Because you ran a coffee shop, you sold it, you had a child, and then while having a child, you also are running like 3 different things in tandem, like going kind of nonstop. Like, how do you do that?
Well, I'll be the first to acknowledge hi, my name is Amanda. I'm a workaholic. A little bit of that. It's hard for me not to work. My dad was part of the greatest generation, or the silent generation, whatever you want to call them. He grew up during the Depression, and in Appalachia. So he had the work ethic he passed down to me. I've never not known what it was like to be busy doing something. Yeah. It's actually hard for me to relax. So I'll put that out there first. But then also I have that optimism. My mom's a boomer. She was the one that, everybody gets a trophy, for the kids, and taught me, you can do whatever you put your mind to. And so I got that kind of combination that I inherited, really set me up. And then add on to that, finding a life partner that was as motivated as I was. I hope you get to meet Brandon one day. A quick story about him. When he was 18, he signed up for the Marine Corps just to prove that he could do it. He had been sick as a kid. No one thought physically he would ever be able to, do much. He had to like be taught to walk and talk at like 4 or 5 years old. And so to like challenge himself to go after the Marine Corps. So maybe that's what attracted me to him, was that drive that I recognized in myself too. So very fortunate there that I've had this team member along the way as well. And then really it's also seeing those hints of where, hey, this did make a difference. Hey, this person's life is different. That actually I just figured out a couple days ago. So I'm about to turn 38 here next week. And when I look back to...
Congratulations.
Thank you.
My birthday was Monday.
Okay.
So we're both in the same season here.
Okay. When I looked back at those early years of the coffee shop, I was looking at what was my income then when I was living on $1, $2 tips in the tip jar. I realized that this year I will tithe more than my total income back then.
Oh my gosh.
Like, how amazing is that in 13 years to see that kind of transformation? And I know the next 30 years, the sky's the limit still, right? My best years are still ahead of me.
Absolutely. Well, that would be extremely motivating. That's cool that you're able to keep track of that and think of that way. I found that like breaking down micro goals and looking at things a little more creatively is really helpful. The ways that you can pay back yourself it's like, it is those moments of realizing like, oh my gosh, I have the capacity to give more than I could, however many years ago. It's also like, maybe I have the capacity. When I hear business owners saying they haven't taken a vacation in 5 years, I'm like, maybe it's giving yourself the capacity to take a vacation too, or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's super, super cool. So doing all of this, has your family and your friends and everybody always kind of supported you as you've done something that's pretty unconventional,
No, we've absolutely had the naysayers and, those that thought we were bananas to go after this, and some that still do. Because, I mean, honestly, I have $0 in the stock market right now, and that's a choice that I've made. Very weird for a financial professional to say that, especially like to the public on a podcast. Most people would think I'm bananas. I've lost my mind, but it aligns with my values, aligns with who I am. And that's exactly what I want for all my clients too, to make sure they're clear. Like you mentioned, those goals, they know where they're going. They've set their sights on their future that they want, and that they're creating both tomorrow and 1,000 tomorrows from now and 10,000 tomorrows from now. And then let's make sure that everything aligns with that they get the vacation, that the money is aligned, all those things. And as long as folks are doing that, I don't think anybody's bananas. And so I've like given myself permission to do that, despite the naysayers, despite what others would say. And I want to give every other person the ability to do that too.
I love your approach, because I think that everybody's looking for somebody else's set of rules. And even listening to a podcast, I mean, you were talking about what's the most profitable job in the world. And, it's bankers. And I guess what I'm getting at is like, the rules that are set in stone aren't necessarily what are the best thing for like yourself and what you get out of life. And it seems like that's something that you all prioritize a lot over there. Yeah,
especially because a lot of those rules are from the 1980s, and we accept them as if they've been true since the dawn of time. And what we really love to do is bust some of those myths. That's part of why our podcast is called the Wealth Wisdom Financial Podcast, because then we can say, what's really the hundreds, thousands of year old wisdom? How have people been building wealth for generations upon generations? And it actually surprises a lot of people that that's the exact kind of thing that we were never told either when we first watched that documentary. That's the kind of things that we're sharing and spreading information about.
Yeah. What are some other examples of some conventional wisdom that you've been like, since you've dove in, that you've been like, well, I think I might challenge that a little bit?
Yeah. There's so many that are coming to mind from recent episodes, or I'll give you a sneak peek in the next episode that's about to come out. I'm not, it might already be out by the time this actually is public and airs.
Awesome.
But we're talking about adaptability and accessibility. And so many people chase after a rate of return. If they are going to get, 8, 10, 12%, doesn't matter, they're going to go after it. Where there are other values that we might want to consider how important they are to us and how we might prioritize those. So we actually use the example of Charles Darwin. A lot of people, when they hear that name, they think exactly like survival of the fittest, the strongest, the best, that's who survives. When really his whole thing was it's actually those that can adapt are the ones that survive. And if we're chasing after a rate of return, we might not be able to adapt, and we can't, we can't adjust. So to use this in a business example, if we're just going after what's the most profitable business, how can we make the most money? And then something like a pandemic hits, we might not switch to making PPE or hand sanitizer, those kind of things, because we've been chasing after this other thing. We're becoming so much efficient that we don't have the capacity to adapt. Same with if we're putting all our money in the stock market. When the stock market goes down, we can't adapt. We have to wait till it recovers before we can sell and not claim a big loss. Those kind of things I just don't think are talked about enough. And so it's part of why we talk about it. How can we make sure that we keep a flexibility and adaptability within our financial strategies?
No, and I think that's really, really essential. I mean, even I think it's kind of like a commonly held business idea that if demand isn't there, you probably should take a moment to pivot. But that applies to more than just your approach to what you're providing for a customer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. And also the pursuit of efficiency is how we often get to a rate of return. We're going to produce exactly the amount of products we know we can sell, not more, not less. But then if we become so efficient, we can't adapt when circumstances change nearly as quickly as if we have a little bit of space, a little bit of margin.
So I love that, by the way. But whenever you're thinking, because we've talked about, running a business ethically and also managing your money ethically. And obviously there's a lot of different lines for how that might work for somebody, but I'd love to hear, and from what you've been doing, what are some of the ways that you feel that a business can start inching towards operating more ethically? Based on some of the research that you've found?
Yeah, the number one place to start is with your employees, including yourself, and making sure we're giving fair wages, not just a livable wage, but a wage that allows folks to live a good life, to pursue their goals and passions. And that includes us as the owners, but also all of our staff. Because remember, we're starting with ourselves and then our immediate, right, the employees. And then from there, you can think all kinds of things about sourcing, who you use to run your payroll, all the different vendors. You can look at each one and say, do I believe in this company? Do I believe in where these products are coming from? How much transparency is here? And that's really great. And then the third thing I would add is, how we use the money that flows through our hands. Yeah, sure, support the local, PTA, your kids, school, support your faith organization, stuff like that. But also think about where you're storing your money. The bank that has your checking and savings account, what you're using for retirement savings. It's not just about how we give, but also about how we save and invest, and who we owe money to, who we're in debt to. We have to think about those spheres of the flow of money as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I think that is something that is often overlooked is, hey, who are the people that are literally holding all of our money and our, and their, our future in their hands, essentially. And what are they doing with that? Because, I remember it was a long time ago whenever I ran into the epiphany that I was like, wait a second. So all of my money that's in the bank can just be used to do like anything? That's so crazy. And that was something that I remember realizing a long time ago that shifted my whole perspective on things,
Mm-hmm. It's not even in the bank.
No, it's just like a fake number. It's pretty wild to think about. I think that what you're doing is, really, really great. What's been some of the kind of initial impacts that you've seen the podcast start making now that you've been vocalizing some of these things and creating an audience?
Yeah, actually, so one of my good friends is an executive director of a nonprofit, and we did a podcast episode about ESG investing or impact investing, where you're thinking about, the companies that you invest in and the good they're doing in the world, and you try to, buy stocks in those kind of companies and stuff. And we kind of bust that open, break it apart. Is it really working? Those kind of things. And it was really super fun to hear her share that she took that podcast episode, shared it with this little group of other activists that she's a part of, and they had a whole discussion about it. And it was super eye-opening to them. Now, these are activists. I thought, oh, there'd be nothing new here that I would have shared. And yet it was something that was unique and interesting enough that they needed to discuss it and say, like, how does this hit us? What's different here than what we've understood before? And when they had already been thinking about impact investing and how they decide where to invest their dollars, it was something totally new. And I don't know, that was recent story. I don't know exactly what's going to come from that, but that awareness, if you've been in the nonprofit sector, it's all about awareness. You got to spread the word, make sure more people know about it. That's really what the podcast helps us do. But then also changing that awareness into action. Because if we just get aware, we never take action, we get jaded. When we turn it into action, is when we start to see the optimism and the hope and that we can make a difference. And so that we invite people every show to reach out to us, to schedule an intro, see how we might work together. And sometimes we'll work together, sometimes we don't, but we always try to leave them toward a better path than if they had never met us.
I think that's great, because planting the seed is obviously great, but if you can't be there to water it, so to speak, like, nothing might ever come to fruition. So that would be really exciting to me to get to see that. And I can see how that would be something that I think even with doing this podcast, I experience a little bit of that too, where I've had people reach out to me and be like, hey, you shared a little bit of something that really, really, stood out to me, or the guests that I meet. It's just really exciting how just being naturally curious and sharing that with others can develop into something like that.
Yeah, you never know what door's going to open from there, or what path it's going to lead you down, the next connection, or those kind of things.
Yeah, totally. So what are, some of the basics that you think people need to know about for finding financial freedom?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I see is that people kind of overcomplicate it. They pick up this strategy here, they listen to that piece of advice there. They end up with a totally chaotic financial portfolio. They don't remember why they have this thing or that thing. I liken it to a bucket of rocks. They're just carrying around, spending money here, investing money there, all these things. And what I really love to encourage people is that it doesn't have to be that complicated. And to picture, how throughout history, in all civilizations around the world, people have put rocks on top of rocks. It's called a cairn, right? And you have a big rock at the bottom and you kind of stack it up. Maybe you have a bigger rock over on top of a smaller rock, but you start with a foundation. That it could really be that simple. You could have 4 or 5 rocks, 4 or 5 financial products that are your whole financial world, way less to complicate and think about. Sure, you'll diversify within those rocks. They won't all be, gold. Some of them might have a little bit of, other materials in them, stuff like that. But that we really can simplify it. And it starts with the foundation. And so many are building their financial portfolios upside down. They're taking way more risk than they realize. And so I love to come and kind of open our minds to, well, do we have to take that much risk? The world tells us we have to. The financial advisors out there tell us we have to. But do we really need to? And what would it look like if we had a foundation to build on top of from there?
Such another good way to look at it, because I feel like the bucket of rocks analogy is something that I can definitely imagine. I hear people who have a little bit of something everywhere, and they probably forget about a lot of it, too, which is kind of funny. So yeah, doing that would be, I mean, I'm like, gosh, that would be so much more simple. So I know our audience is going to get a lot out of getting to hear about that. Another thing I was kind of curious about before we were chatting was, are there any myths that you hear about money management that you think would be good for anybody to know, just for the record, or are either not true or maybe could be dispelled a little bit?
Oh, there's so many of them.
I know.
Shoot.
Right.
So I'm talking to people that are they're planning on not being dependent on a W-2. They're building a business. They got a side hustle, something like that. And I think they've woken up to a lot of those myths that you can depend on your employer, you can depend on your 401k. Maybe the biggest one I would jump into is that investing is saving. And when people talk about their saving in their 401k or their Roth IRA or their saving in their brokerage account, that's investing. And savings is different than investing. That's something that the people that would have been our grandparents, the greatest generation, they talked about that all the time. That you have your savings, you save in your savings money that you cannot afford to lose, and you only invest money you can afford to lose. And we've kind of flip-flopped that. Back in 1952, I read this the other day, only like 5.4% of Americans invest in the stock market. Today, it's over 50%.
Wow.
And yet people think that's the only way you can build wealth is in the stock market. And yet, our grandparents, they built some wealth. They lived good lives. They made great choices. They might not have done it perfectly. We can, build on top of that, stand on their shoulders, so to speak. But there's a lot we can learn about how they live their lives simply, sustainably, how they saved first and then invested, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, the way that you have studied previous generations and some of the trends that have happened around then. Even at the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned like studying the past so that you can prepare for the future. Yep. And gosh, I can't remember who was saying this, but I was reading that a true historian, or like the way that this person defines a historian, isn't somebody that only looks at the past, but also studies the future and, considers what's going to happen. So it seems like, you've everything you've been saying is kind of added, or in my mind has shown that you do a little bit of that. And, it's given me some really great things to think about.
Great.
It's really, really cool.
Cool. Yeah. Here's a little tidbit for you. Do you know when the US dollar was created?
No. When?
What's your guess? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No. I'm happy to be put on the spot. Okay. Let me think. 18. I'm not going to Google it either. I want to say in the 1850s.
Okay. Yeah. It was after the Civil War, well after the Civil War, in the late 1800s. Before then, we used the Spanish dollar, and it was this coin, right? You had to carry a lot of it to move from place to place. And so little cities, states, they'd have their own currency. Even like a bank would have its own bank notes, which would be the form of cash. And it wasn't until the late 1800s when the U.S. decided to create a U.S. currency. But actually in the Constitution, the government's not allowed to create it. It says that in the Constitution, it says that the government can mint coin, but it doesn't mention printing money. So the constitutional purists said, well, if you want to create banknotes, you can't do that, federal government. You got to figure out something else to do. And so they authorized the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not a part of our U.S. government, and it's not really a bank either. But that's who creates our currency.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
And it's like, pull $1 out of your wallet, you'll see it says right there at the top, Federal Reserve Note. It's just like the banknotes that would have been from a small, bank. Actually, I can go to the museum here in Cincinnati and I can see the Cincinnati bank notes there from back in the day. And it's the exact same thing, just on a national scale.
Oh my gosh. I had no idea. That's so interesting.
Yeah, but totally transforms how you think about money.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Because it's so like, it's just like, I'm a sociology major, so I'm always like looking at things like, oh yeah, that's just another example of something that is fabricated by society, and it's funny how we just operate under these like rules that we've just spurred up not even that long ago.
Yep.
So pretty fascinating.
So much good stuff. I could go on and on.
Absolutely. No, that's so cool. That's so cool. So in wrapping up towards the end of this, what I always like to ask the same two questions. One, what is the favorite part of what you do? And then two, is there anything that you tell somebody who's curious about becoming an entrepreneur like you?
Yeah, these are actually going to tie together for me. I ended up studying psychology in college. I went to liberal arts school, but I loved the social sciences. I chose psychology because of the fewest requirements. I could really take all the sociology and social science classes that I wanted. And that like love of people has really driven everything that I do. And I just love getting to know people, meeting with them, starting to build a relationship and then walk through that relationship for years. Some of my first clients, we've been meeting every 6 months for 4.5 years now. And just to see that, trajectory of their lives and know I'm going to be here for the next 20 or 30 years I'm just so much looking forward to it. And hopefully beyond, right? Building relationships, Absolutely. Going deep with people that way. And at least every 6 months, sometimes we talk more often. And it's more of like a friendship kind of thing, not just talking about how their portfolio is doing or whatnot. And that's exactly what I love to tell entrepreneurs. One of the best pieces of advice that I was given is to never do anything alone. As much as possible, include someone else. Even if you're just going to pick up supplies at the store, have somebody in the passenger seat of the car. Or, figure out a way to, if you're making brochures, you got to fold a bunch of pieces of paper, sit there and have a conversation with someone while you're doing it. Or, be part of masterminds. That's really about the relational network more than anything else. And so pour into that, keep that in a place of priority, and it'll take you way further than you could go if you were just doing it by yourself.
So powerful. I sometimes I feel like the biggest meaning of life in general, which is, I'm not going to be like, tell you I'm thinking about the meaning of life on this podcast or anything like that right now. Everybody has their own, but at the end of the day, it's all about people and relationships. And that's, I love to hear that that's what drives you and what you do. So yeah, totally agree with that advice. That's some amazing insights. And you've given incredible insights throughout the entire podcast. I really, really thank you for your time on this. It was an absolute pleasure to meet you, Amanda.
Great to meet you too, Blake. I hope we get to build a relationship from here and do more and more together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So where can everybody find you and look for all of your things at?
So if you loved the insights and the bits of wisdom that we shared here, all you got to do is look wherever you listen to podcasts, or if you love watching YouTube, look for Wealth Wisdom Financial and you'll find us. And then our main website is grandmaswealthwisdom.com. That's where we actually invite you to reach out to us, schedule an intro call, see if we're a good fit to work together, and if we want to build a relationship that helps you break through to a smart, stable financial future.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Amanda. And everybody, this has been the Gym Series. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Gym Series, the podcast for anybody dedicated to investing in themselves. If you would like to see the resources mentioned in this episode, learn more about what we are up to at Rocket Level, or come over and join our team, just click on the links below. Until next time, this is Blake Chapman, and remember to be awesome and do awesome things.